In the heart of corporate power, a street kid crashes a boardroom meeting dressed in a tattered suit. Ignored and humiliated by the company's CEO, he remains silent, but he has already decided the fate of everyone in the room. What seemed like just prejudice became the trigger for the collapse of an entire empire. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Let's get back to it. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. Monday morning dawned gray over New York City. The heavy clouds seemed to weigh on the skyscrapers of Park Avenue, as if foreshadowing something more than just rain. On the 42nd floor of a glass and steel tower, where the silence was broken only by the discreet hum of the air conditioning, a meeting was about to begin. It was the kind of meeting that decided fates, that moved billions, that could build empires or destroy them in a matter of hours. Gabriel Miller was only 12 years old, but he carried a depth in his eyes that didn't match his age. His brown hair was carefully combed, though the suit he wore seemed too big in the shoulders and too short in the sleeves. The fabric was wrinkled, there was a small tear on the lapel, and the navy blue tie hung crookedly on his chest. In his hands, he held a worn leather briefcase with scuffs and scratches that told stories no one in that room could possibly imagine. As he walked down the Italian marble hallway toward the conference room, the employees' gazes followed him with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Some whispered. Others simply stopped what they were doing to watch the small, humbly dressed boy walk with steady steps toward the heart of Sterling Development, one of the largest real estate development firms in the country. The executive assistant, a middle-aged woman with designer glasses and a flawless bun, tried to intercept him politely. "Sir, I think there's been a mistake. This meeting is restricted to key investors." Gabriel just smiled faintly and showed her the ID badge hanging from his neck. The name was there, followed by a code that made the woman's eyes widen. She swallowed hard, nodded, and opened the carved mahogany door that led to the main room. The room was imposing. The conference table, made of fine wood with a mirrored finish, took up almost the entire center of the rectangular space. Around it, 15 Italian leather chairs awaited their occupants. The walls were made of tempered glass, offering a panoramic view of the city that stretched as far as the eye could. See? In the upper right corner, a security camera blinked discreetly, part of the mandatory corporate transparency system the company had been forced to install after a governance scandal years ago. 6 executives were already present, all middle-aged men wearing tailored suits from international brands. They spoke in low voices, flipping through documents, typing on tablets. When Gabriel entered, a heavy silence fell like a curtain. All eyes turned to him, scanning him from head to toe, assessing, judging, condemning. One of the directors, a bald man with a graying mustache, frowned. "Who let this kid in here?" Another executive, younger, with slicked-back hair and a watch that cost more than a mid-sized sedan, let out a muffled laugh. "Must be an employee's son. Someone call security." Gabriel didn't respond. He walked to one of the empty chairs, placed his briefcase on the table, and remained standing, waiting. He knew that speaking at that moment would be useless. He had learned on the streets, a long time ago, that there are times when silence says more than 1,000 words. He had also learned that power rarely comes from the one who shouts the loudest, but from the one who knows how to wait for the right moment. The door opened again, this time with more authority. Victoria Sterling entered as if taking possession of a conquered territory. She was 38 but looked younger. Her styled blonde hair fell over the shoulders of a flawless white blazer. Her high heels echoed on the granite floor, announcing her presence before anyone saw her. Her face was beautiful, with delicate features, but there was a tightness in her jaw, a coldness in her green eyes that betrayed years of unchallenged command. She came from a long line of developers. Her grandfather had founded Sterling Development in the 50s, erecting skyscrapers when New York was still a city of brownstones and streetcars. Her father had expanded the empire, building shopping malls, luxury condos, 5-star hotels. Victoria had taken over as CEO at 32, after her father left for a position in the government. Since then, she had ruled with an iron fist, making bold decisions, closing multi-million-dollar deals, and eliminating any internal opposition. But over the last 18 months, things had started to fall apart. Delayed projects, soaring costs, nervous investors, banks pushing for collateral. The company's stock was slowly plummeting, eroding its market value. There were rumors in the industry that Sterling Development was on the verge of collapse. Victoria denied it publicly, but she knew she needed a miracle, or more precisely, $3 billion in emergency investment. That's when her CFO had mentioned the name Gabriel Miller, a 12-year-old boy, heir to an unexpected fortune, controller of one of the country's largest investment funds. At first, Victoria had laughed. She thought it was a joke, but the numbers didn't lie. The boy controlled assets totaling an unimaginable sum, and more importantly, he had immediate liquidity. She needed that money. She needed it desperately. But she had never imagined he would come in person. She thought he would send representatives, lawyers, consultants. Seeing that boy there, dressed like that in that room, was like a slap in the face. Victoria stopped in the middle of the room, looked at Gabriel, and felt a wave of contempt rise from her stomach. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" Her voice was cold, sharp as a blade. Gabriel met her gaze calmly. "I'm Gabriel Miller. I'm here for the 9 o'clock meeting." One of the directors leaned in to whisper something in Victoria's ear. Her face changed. The look of contempt gave way to an almost comical disbelief. She blinked several times, as if trying to reprocess the information. "You? You're the fund's representative?" "I'm not the representative," Gabriel replied in a firm voice without arrogance, simply stating a fact. "I'm the owner." The room plunged into an awkward silence. Victoria looked at her directors, who averted their eyes. She looked at the boy again, up and down, noticing the ill-fitting suit, the crooked tie, the old briefcase. And then something inside her refused to accept it. It was impossible, unacceptable. She commanded an empire of concrete and steel, made decisions that affected thousands of lives, negotiated with the most powerful men in the country. She could not, would not, lower herself to negotiate with a child dressed like a beggar. Victoria took 2 steps toward Gabriel and extended her hand, but not as a gesture of greeting. It was a test, a challenge. She wanted to see if he would have the nerve to shake her hand, if he would dare to touch a sterling with those hands that looked like they had known dirt and poverty. Gabriel extended his hand, as well without hesitation. His grip would be firm yet respectful. He had learned from Mr. Vance years ago that a handshake revealed character. But Victoria pulled her hand back before he could touch it. The movement was quick, almost instinctive, as if she had been burned. "I don't shake hands with people like you," she said, and every word dripped with venom. Time seemed to freeze. The executives around the table were paralyzed, some with their fingers still on their tablet keyboards, others with pens suspended in mid-air. The camera in the corner of the room kept recording, faithful and silent, capturing every second, every gesture, every word. Gabriel didn't pull his hand back immediately. He kept it extended for a few more seconds, as if offering one last chance. Then, slowly, he lowered his arm and took a step back. There was no anger on his face, just an old sadness, the kind of sadness that comes when you understand that some people will never see beyond appearances. Victoria proceeded to the head of the table and sat down with the straight posture of a commander. "Let's begin," she announced, completely ignoring what had just happened. "I have another meeting in 2 hours." Gabriel pulled out a chair and sat down, opening his leather briefcase. From inside, he took out a series of documents organized in clear plastic sleeves. They were financial analyses, cash flow projections, audit reports, risk maps, all printed on plain paper, without the graphic sophistication of the reports that usually circulated there, but the substance was undeniable. "I began analyzing Sterling Development's situation 3 weeks ago," Gabriel said, flipping through the papers. "My team identified some critical points that need to be addressed before any capital commitment." Victoria rolled her eyes. "Your team? Your 12? What team?" Gabriel was unfazed. "I have specialized consultants, economists, engineers, lawyers. They work for me." One of the directors, Roger Fleming, the CFO, leaned forward. "With all due respect, how does a kid your age come to control a fund of this size?" Gabriel knew this question would come. It always did. "I inherited it. From someone who trusted me. Inherited from whom? Victoria pressed, a cynical smile on her lips. Santa Claus? There were quiet snickers around the table. Gabriel took a deep breath. From a man named Arthur Vance. He passed away 2.5 years ago. He left everything to me. The silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence. Some of them knew the name Arthur Vance. He had been one of the most respected investors in the country. Discreet, brilliant, a visionary. He had disappeared from public life a few years ago, and there were rumors about the fate of his fortune. Now, apparently, the answer was sitting right there, wearing a shabby suit. Victoria, however, was not impressed. So you got lucky. That doesn't mean you know what you're doing. Gabriel began to present the numbers. He spoke about the accumulated debt, the unfinished projects, the cash flow problems, the imminent contractual penalties. His voice was calm, clear, factual. There was no accusation, only analysis. But Victoria interrupted him every 3 sentences. That's speculation. Those numbers are outdated. You don't understand the industry. This projection is amateurish. Each interruption was loaded with poorly disguised contempt. She wasn't there to listen. She was there to get the money and send the boy away. The directors around the table exchanged uncomfortable glances. They knew Gabriel was right. They knew the company was in trouble. But none of them would dare contradict Victoria. Anyone who did would be fired before lunch. The culture at Sterling Development didn't allow for opposition. Victoria commanded, and everyone obeyed. Gabriel continued presenting, despite being interrupted. He showed charts, pointed out trends, highlighted risks. His analysis was deep, detailed, impressive for any age, let alone a 12-year-old boy. But Victoria only saw the appearance. She saw the torn suit. She saw the crooked tie. She saw the poverty he carried like a shadow. After 40 minutes of a fragmented presentation, Gabriel reached the most delicate part. For the investment to make sense, it would be necessary to implement structural changes in management, more transparent governance, a quarterly independent audit, an external advisory board. Victoria slammed her palm on the table. Are you telling me how to run my company? No, Gabriel replied. I'm telling you the conditions for investing in it. Your conditions are ridiculous. Your analysis is amateurish. Your consultants are incompetent. And you, frankly, don't have the maturity to be in this room. Gabriel slowly gathered his documents, putting them back into the leather briefcase. He hadn't said anything offensive yet. He hadn't retaliated. But something in his eyes changed. It was as if a decision had been made, silent and irreversible. Victoria continued, You show up here dressed like a beggar, thinking you can give orders. You want to know what I think? I think you got lucky. Very lucky. And now you're playing businessman. But this is the real world, kid. Here, the people in charge are the ones who built things, who worked for it, who have a name, a tradition, a history, not someone who got everything handed to them. Gabriel closed the briefcase. May I be excused for a few minutes? I need to make a call. Victoria waved dismissively. Be my guest. While you're at it, call your parents, ask them if they know where you are. Gabriel left the room without another word. In the hallway, he walked to the panoramic window overlooking the city. Down below, New York City was buzzing. Cars moved like ants. People rushed from one place to another. Life went on at a frantic pace. He remembered when he lived down there, when he slept on sidewalks, when he went hungry, when he had nothing but hope. He took his phone out of his pocket. It wasn't a fancy device. It was simple, functional. He dialed a number from memory. A voice answered on the other end. Gabriel said just one short, direct sentence. Clause 8.3, execute now. The voice on the other end hesitated. Are you sure, Gabriel? This is irreversible. I'm sure. There was a pause, then a sigh. Understood. It will be done in 15 minutes. Gabriel hung up. He put the phone away. He stood looking out the window for a few more moments, as if he wanted to burn that moment into his memory. Then he went back to the conference room. Victoria was talking to 2 directors, laughing about something. When Gabriel entered, she didn't even look at him. Did you sort things out? The irony was thick in her voice. Yes, I did. Thank you. The meeting continued. Victoria presented the company's optimistic projections, talked about new contracts, strategic partnerships, a bright future. Everything seemed to be on track. She was confident. She thought she had controlled the situation, that she had put that boy in his place. That's when the cell phone started vibrating. First it was Roger, the CFO. He looked at his screen and turned pale. He shot up from his chair as if he'd been hit by an electric shock. "Excuse me, I need to take this." Victoria frowned. "What is it?" Before he could answer, another phone vibrated, and another, and another. Within seconds, all the executives were staring at their screens with expressions of horror. The director of operations, Paul Harrison, answered a call. His voice trembled. "What do you mean they pulled out? Everything? When?" Victoria felt her stomach churn. "What is going on?" Roger dropped his phone on the table and stared at her with wide eyes. The fund pulled its capital, $3.1 billion. They just liquidated everything. The blood drained from Victoria's face. She looked at Gabriel. He was sitting calmly, his hands folded over his leather briefcase, his face serene. "You can't do that," she said, but her voice came out weak, almost pleading. Gabriel looked at her. "Yes, I can. It's in the contract. Your legal team signed it. Clause 8.3. Documented discriminatory behavior authorizes the immediate withdrawal of capital, without prior notice, without penalties, without the right to renegotiate." Victoria stood up, her legs shaky. "This is insane. You're going to destroy the company over a handshake." Gabriel pointed to the camera in the corner of the room. "It's not because of a handshake. It's because of everything that came after. Every word, every interruption, every humiliation. It's all recorded, all documented. Your company was forced to install these cameras, forced to record every meeting. You provided the evidence yourselves." The phones kept vibrating. The news came in one after another. The markets were reacting. Sterling Development stock was in a nosedive. Banks were cancelling lines of credit. Suppliers were suspending contracts. Foreign investors were backing out. Victoria tried to approach Gabriel, but she stumbled. One of the directors caught her by the arm, but she shook him off. This can't be happening. But it was, and there was no going back. The first 6 hours after the capital withdrawal were a waking nightmare for everyone at Sterling Development. The reception phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists wanting confirmation, investors demanding explanations, frightened employees asking for reassurance. The entire building vibrated with chaotic energy, like a sinking ship with the crew running desperately for lifeboats. Gabriel left the building through a side entrance, avoiding the commotion that was already starting to form in the main lobby. He gave no interviews. He made no statements. He just walked to the underground parking garage where a discreet driver was waiting for him in an ordinary silver sedan, nothing flashy. During the drive home, Gabriel looked out the window, watching the city that had both welcomed and rejected him so many times. New York was like that, giant, indifferent, capable of lifting people to the top of the world or crushing them until nothing but dust remained. He knew both sides of that coin. The house where he lived was in a quiet neighborhood in Queens, far from the skyscrapers and the frenzy of the financial district. It wasn't a mansion. It was a simple single-story house with a front garden and low walls. Eleanor Vance, Arthur's widow, had insisted that Gabriel live with her after everything changed. She was 68, with white hair tied in a loose bun and wrinkled hands that trembled slightly when she held her teacup. She had no children. Arthur had been the love of her life, and when he passed, leaving his entire fortune to a boy he had met on the streets, Eleanor could have contested it. She could have fought it in court, but she didn't. Instead, she welcomed Gabriel as if he were the grandson she never had. When Gabriel got home, he found Eleanor in the kitchen, making lunch. The smell of seasoned rice and simmering beans filled the air. She turned when she heard him and smiled, but the smile faltered when she saw the look on the boy's face. Did something happen? Gabriel put his briefcase on the table and sat down. I activated Clause 8.3. Eleanor turned off the stove, dried her hands on her apron and sat down next to him. "Are you sure it was necessary?" "She said she doesn't shake hands with people like me." Eleanor closed her eyes and sighed. She knew Gabriel carried deep, invisible scars, the kind no amount of money could heal. She also knew he was different, that he would never use his power to hurt someone without reason. If he had activated that clause, it was because something very serious had happened. "What are you going to do now?" Gabriel shrugged. "Nothing. It's already done." But Eleanor knew the boy well enough to know that it hurt him. He wasn't vengeful. He was just someone who had learned to protect himself. And protection sometimes came in the form of distance. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, chaos had fully descended upon the Sterling Development headquarters. Victoria was locked in her office on the top floor, desperately trying to make calls. Banks, investors, partners. No one was answering. The ones who did were cold, evasive, muttering excuses and hanging up quickly. Her father, Edward Sterling, arrived at the building an hour after the news broke. He was 72 with completely white hair, his posture still proud despite his age. He was the one who had built most of the empire, who had turned his father's small construction company into an industry powerhouse, and now everything he had built was crumbling. Edward entered Victoria's office without knocking. "What did you do?" Victoria had her back to him, looking out the window, her arms crossed over her chest. "I didn't do anything. It was that boy. He sabotaged everything." That boy was Gabriel Miller. Edward knew the name. He knew the story. And he also knew about Clause 8.3, because he was the one who had warned Victoria about it when they signed the contract. He had warned her, told her to be careful, but Victoria hadn't listened. She never listened. "You humiliated him, didn't you?" Edward said, his voice heavy with disappointment. Victoria spun around abruptly. "He showed up dressed like a beggar, in a torn suit. Was I supposed to treat him as an equal?" "I expected you to treat him with respect. He controls $3 billion, and you treated him like he was nothing." "Because he is nothing, a street kid who got lucky." Edward walked to the desk, placed his hands on the glass top and stared at her. "You know what your problem is, Victoria? You think the world owes you something, you think you were born at the top and that no one else can climb up there. But the world doesn't work that way. It never has." Victoria felt tears burning in her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. She wouldn't cry, she wouldn't show weakness. "I'm going to fix this, I'll find other investors, I'll save the company." Edward shook his head slowly. "You won't. The stock has dropped 32% in 6 hours. The banks have already suspended our lines of credit. Suppliers are cancelling contracts and, you know, the worst part, the recording has already leaked." "What do you mean, leaked?" Edward took out his phone and showed her the screen. It was a video. The quality was good. You could see everything. Victoria refusing the handshake. Victoria interrupting Gabriel. Victoria ridiculing his analysis. Every second of humiliation, documented and now circulating online. Social media exploded. Hashtags were trending. The video was shared thousands of times in a few hours. Pundits analyzed every frame. Commentators debated on live TV. Public opinion was divided. Some defended Victoria, saying she had the right to be indignant about Gabriel's inappropriate appearance at a formal meeting. But the majority were furious. They saw in her gesture everything that was wrong with the American elite, the prejudice, the arrogance, the contempt for those who came from nothing. As the digital storm grew, Gabriel tried to live a normal life. He attended classes at a private school where he was on a scholarship that he himself paid for, along with 20 other students from underprivileged communities. His classmates knew he had money, but they had no idea of the scale. He didn't flaunt it, he wore the same uniform as everyone else, brought a packed lunch, sat in the back of the class and rarely spoke. He had one friend, Chloe Davis, 15 years old, curly hair always tied in a high ponytail, expressive brown eyes, an easy smile. She had been in the same class as Gabriel since the previous year. She didn't know who he really was. To her, Gabriel was just the quiet kid who helped everyone with math and never complained about anything. It was Chloe who showed him the video during their break. It was on her phone, which she held with slightly trembling hands. "Gabriel, have you seen this? There's a boy who looks just like you." Gabriel looked at the screen. He saw himself in the conference room. He saw Victoria refusing the handshake. He saw everything. He felt his stomach churn, but he kept his face neutral. "He does look like me," he said, handing the phone back. But Chloe wasn't stupid. She looked at him, then at the video, then back at him. "Gabriel, is that boy you?" He hesitated. He thought about lying. But Chloe deserved the truth. "Yeah." Her eyes widened. "You're the kid who brought down Sterling Development?" "I didn't bring anything down. I just withdrew my investment." Chloe sat on the bench next to him, processing the information. "So you really have all that money? It's all true?" "It's true. Why didn't you ever say anything?" Gabriel looked out at the schoolyard, where other students were playing soccer, talking, laughing. "Because here I'm just Gabriel. I don't want to be anything else." Chloe was silent for a moment. Then she put a hand on his shoulder. "You're still just Gabriel. Having money doesn't change who you are, but it changes how people see me. Not to me." And in that moment, Gabriel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging, not because of the money, but because of a true friendship, built without self-interest, without expectations, without masks. Meanwhile, Victoria's situation worsened by the hour. The company was in a freefall. Employees were resigning. Clients were cancelling contracts. The reputation of Sterling Development, built over decades, was being destroyed in record time. The next morning, Edward called an emergency board meeting. All the main shareholders were present, including representatives from pension funds, banks, and institutional investors. The room was tense. Everyone knew what was at stake. Edward spoke first. "We need to make a decision. The company is on the brink of collapse. The stock has plummeted. We've lost all credibility, and all of this happened because of an avoidable mistake." Victoria sat at the opposite end of the table, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She tried to defend herself. "It wasn't a mistake, it was a trap. That boy came here to destroy us." One of the shareholders, Hector Sampson, who owned an investment fund, interrupted her. "He came here to invest. You're the one who humiliated him. I saw the recording. Everyone saw it." Another shareholder, Lucy Mendez, a bank representative, agreed. "Clause 8.3 was in the contract. We all knew about it. You were warned, and you still acted with disrespect." Victoria felt the walls closing in. She tried a different tactic. "We can sue, claim bad faith, breach of contract." Edward shook his head. "There's no way to sue. The contract is ironclad. And worse, if we sue, the press will have more ammunition. We'll look not only arrogant, but also vindictive." "So what do you want me to do?" Victoria asked, her voice rising. Hector answered, coldly. "We want your resignation." The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Victoria looked around the table, searching for support. But she found only hard, determined stares. Even her father looked away. "You're blaming me for everything. Is that it?" "We're holding you accountable for your actions," Lucy said calmly. "You're the CEO. The responsibility is yours." Victoria stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I've built billion-dollar projects. I've closed deals no one thought possible. I've saved this company from bankruptcy 3 times. And now you want to throw me out?" Edward finally spoke, his voice filled with sadness. "You didn't save the company. You kept it running, but you never learned to lead with humility. And now we're all paying the price." Victoria felt her legs go weak. She looked at her father, the man who had always been her hero, her role model, her guide. And she saw disappointment. She saw exhaustion. She saw surrender. She left the room without another word. She walked down the marble hallway she knew by heart, past the reception desk where the assistants averted their gaze, and took the private elevator to the parking garage. She got into her imported car, closed the door, and finally let the tears fall. She cried for everything she was losing. She cried for the company. She cried for her reputation. She cried for her relationship with her father. But not once did she cry for the boy she had humiliated. She still didn't understand. She still thought she was the victim. 3 days later, the news became official. Victoria Sterling resigned as CEO of Sterling Development. The press release cited personal reasons, the pursuit of new challenges, a need for renewal. But everyone knew the truth. She had been forced out. Edward temporarily took over as CEO, trying to stop the bleeding. He made drastic cuts, renegotiated debts, sought new investors. But trust was shattered. The brand was tarnished. And recovering from something like that would take years, if it was even possible. Meanwhile, Gabriel continued his routine. He went to school, had lunch with Eleanor, helped Chloe with her homework, played video games. He did everything a 12-year-old boy should do. But at night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling of his simple room, he thought about what had happened. He didn't regret it. That clause existed for a reason. To protect him from people who judged him by his appearance, who disrespected him because of his origins. But he felt no pleasure, no sense of victory. He just felt tired. Eleanor knocked on the door and came in, carrying a cup of warm milk with honey. She sat on the edge of the bed. "Do you want to talk?" Gabriel sat up, took the cup, and took a sip. "Sometimes I wonder if Mr. Vance made the right choice, leaving everything to me." Eleanor smiled tenderly. "Arthur never did anything by chance. He saw something in you, something you don't even see in yourself." "What?" "Kindness. Despite everything you've been through, you still have kindness, and that, my dear, is rarer than any fortune." "But I destroyed a company. I made a lot of people lose their jobs." "You didn't destroy anything, you just protected yourself. The company destroyed itself through years of arrogance, mismanagement, and disrespect. You were just the spark, not the cause." Gabriel finished his milk and handed the cup back. "I hope you're right." "I am. And you know how I know? Because Arthur went through it too. He was also judged. He was also humiliated, and yet he never lost his humanity. That's what he saw in you, the same strength, the same dignity." Eleanor kissed Gabriel's forehead and left the room, leaving the door ajar. Gabriel lay back down, but it took him a long time to fall asleep. He thought about Arthur. He thought about the day he met him 7 years ago when he was only 5. It was late afternoon. Gabriel was sitting on a sidewalk on Wall Street, holding a plastic cup, begging for change. He was hungry, he was cold, he was scared. He saw a man in a suit walk by quickly with firm, determined steps. Suddenly the man stopped, clutched his chest and staggered. Gabriel saw him fall to his knees on the ground. People walked around him. Some glanced over, but no one stopped. Everyone was in a hurry. Everyone had their own problems. But Gabriel couldn't just sit there. He ran to the man, held his hand, felt it trembling. He yelled for help. No one came. So he ran to a nearby deli, asked for water, and ran back. The man drank, took a deep breath, and thanked him. The ambulance arrived minutes later. They took the man away. Gabriel was left there alone again, not knowing what had happened, not knowing that that gesture would change his life forever. 2 weeks later, a car pulled up in front of the spot where Gabriel usually stayed. The same man got out, Arthur Vance. He had been looking for the boy. He had spent days trying to find him, and when he did, he offered something no one had ever offered before: a family, a home, a chance. Gabriel accepted, half suspicious, half hopeful. Eleanor welcomed the boy with open arms. She gave him a room, food, clothes, affection. And Arthur, for the next 3 years, taught him everything: about business, about investing, about respect, about dignity. When Arthur passed away, he left everything documented: an ironclad will, a trusted team, a prepared structure, and a letter for Gabriel which he read whenever he needed to remember who he was. The letter said, "Gabriel, you saved me when no one else cared. It wasn't out of obligation. It wasn't for personal gain. It was because you have a pure heart. I hope you never lose that. Money is just a tool. Use it to build, not to destroy. And always remember, true power isn't about how much you have, but how you use it." Gabriel kept the letter in a drawer next to his bed. Sometimes he reread it. Sometimes he just knew it was there, and that was enough. 2 weeks had passed since Victoria's resignation, but the story continued to dominate the news. The case had become a national phenomenon. Universities included the situation in case studies on business ethics. Psychologists analyzed the behavior on television shows, lawyers debated the legal implications, and on social media, the video continued to be shared, commented on and dissected frame by frame. Gabriel tried to keep his distance from it all. He didn't read the news. He didn't go on social media. He didn't give interviews, even with dozens of journalists trying to contact him daily. He just wanted to be invisible again. But invisibility is a luxury billionaires rarely have. At school, the situation became complicated. At first, his classmates tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. But gradually, everything changed. Some started treating him differently. They suddenly wanted to be his friend. They offered help he didn't need. They asked questions. About money, about investments, about his house. Gabriel felt the weight of their stares, their expectations, their unstated intentions. Chloe noticed the change. She saw how Gabriel was becoming quieter, more withdrawn, more distant. One day during lunch, as they sat alone under a tree in the schoolyard, she brought it up. "You've been different." Gabriel chewed on a tasteless sandwich. "I've been thinking." "About what?" "About how everything changes when people find out who you are, or rather what you have." Chloe sighed. "Not everyone is like that, you know. Some people care about you, not your money." "I know, but those people are rare." "Then cherish the rare ones." Gabriel looked at her, really looked, and saw sincerity in her brown eyes. Chloe was different. She always had been. She came from a simple family. Her father was a bus driver. Her mother worked as a cook in a restaurant. Chloe was on a scholarship, just like Gabriel had been before revealing who he was. She understood what it was like to struggle. She understood what it was like to earn things through hard work. "Thanks," Gabriel said, and the smile that appeared on his face was genuine. "You're welcome. That's what friends are for." But the peace was short-lived. That afternoon, when Gabriel arrived home, he found 2 strange cars parked out front. One was black, with tinted windows, like the ones the police used. The other was a plain white sedan. His heart raced. Something was wrong. He walked in the front door and heard voices in the living room. Eleanor was sitting on the sofa, her hands clasped in her lap, her face worried. Next to her were 2 men in suits. One was older, with a prominent belly and thinning hair. The other was young, thin, with an alert gaze. "Gabriel," Eleanor stood up as soon as she saw him, "these gentlemen are from the FBI. They want to ask you a few questions." The older man introduced himself. "Detective Ryan Scott. This is Agent Frank Carter. May we have a word?" Gabriel nodded, feeling his stomach churn. He sat in the armchair, his leather briefcase beside him. "About what?" The detective opened a folder and took out some documents. "We're investigating irregularities at Sterling Development, fraudulent contracts, misuse of public funds, document forgery, and we found something interesting." He showed a photo. It was Victoria signing a contract with a man Gabriel didn't recognize. The date was from 3 years ago. The detective continued. "This man is Robert Fisher. He was arrested yesterday for corruption, and in his testimony he named Victoria Sterling as an accomplice in several schemes." Gabriel didn't know what to say. "That has nothing to do with me." "We know, but we need the recording of the meeting. The camera in the room recorded everything, correct? We need the original video, not the one circulating on the internet. The original might contain evidence. But that recording belongs to Sterling Development, not me." Agent Carter leaned forward. "But you were the one who requested the activation of Clause 8.3. That means your legal team must have a copy of the recording. It's in the contract. Any discriminatory behavior has to be documented." Gabriel took a deep breath. He had a copy. His legal team always kept everything. It was for protection. It was a guarantee. But handing it over meant getting even more involved in the whole mess. Eleanor gently touched his arm. "Gabriel, if this can help bring about justice, maybe it's the right thing to do." He looked at her, at the woman who had taken him in as a grandson, who had never asked for anything in return. who only gave unconditional love. And he remembered Arthur's words. Use your power to build, not to destroy. I'll have my team send the full recording. The detective nodded, satisfied. Thank you, this will be a great help. After the agents left, Eleanor made tea. They sat in the kitchen, silent for a few minutes. Then she asked, Are you okay? I'm tired. Of what? Of everything. Of being different. Of having to make decisions like this. I just want to be a normal kid. Eleanor held his hand across the table. You are a normal kid, with extraordinary responsibilities. But that doesn't change who you are on the inside. Sometimes I think it has. Sometimes I look in the mirror and I don't recognize the boy who used to live on the streets. And that's a good thing. You've grown, you've matured, but your essence is the same. Your heart is the same. Gabriel squeezed her hand. I hope so. Meanwhile, Victoria was in another world. After her resignation, she had isolated herself. She stopped answering her phone. She stopped leaving the house. She lived in a penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side, overlooking the park, surrounded by a luxury that now felt meaningless. Her father had tried to visit a few times, but she wouldn't open the door. She didn't want to see anyone. She didn't want advice. She didn't want pity. She just wanted to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. That's when the phone rang. It was an unknown number. Normally she wouldn't have answered, but something made her press the green button. Hello? Miss Sterling? This is Trevor Miles. I'm Robert Fisher's attorney. Victoria felt her blood run cold. Robert Fisher, the man she had met years ago at a business party, the man who had offered an easy way to secure public contracts, the man who was now in jail. What do you want? I need to speak with you in person. It's urgent. I have nothing to say to you. Yes, you do, because my client mentioned your name. And if you don't cooperate with the investigation, it's going to be much worse for you. Victoria hung up the phone, her hands shaking. She walked to the balcony, looked down at the city below, and for the first time since it all began, she felt true fear. It wasn't fear of losing money. It wasn't fear of losing prestige. It was fear of losing her freedom. In the following days, the FBI investigation moved quickly. With the recording provided by Gabriel's team, the investigators found more than they expected. Not just evidence of Victoria's prejudice, but also side conversations captured by the room's microphones. Conversations about inflated contracts, about kickbacks, about schemes that had been going on for years. The press got access to the first leaks. The EE headlines were devastating. Ousted executive at center of corruption ring. Former Sterling CEO may face charges for misuse of public funds. Real estate empire crumbles amid scandal. Edward Sterling tried to contain the damage, but it was too late. The company he had spent decades building was being destroyed not just by the financial crisis, but by the moral stain that was spreading like ink on paper. He finally managed to reach Victoria by phone. You need to come here. We need to talk. I have nothing to say. Victoria, you're being investigated for serious crimes. You need a lawyer. You need to defend yourself. Defend myself from what? From doing what everyone else does? From playing the game you taught me? Edward felt a pain in his chest, not a literal one. It was a deep, emotional pain, the kind only a father can feel when he realizes he has failed. I never taught you to be dishonest. No? Then explain to me how the company grew so much, how we got so many contracts, how we won so many bids. With hard work, with bribes, with favors, with dirty tricks. You just didn't want to see it, Edward. Hung up the phone. He sat down in his office chair, the same chair where he had spent so many hours of his life building something that was now falling apart. And for the first time in decades, he cried. As the Sterling family drama unfolded, Gabriel continued trying to live his life, but it was difficult. Journalists camped outside his house. Photographers tried to snap pictures of him on his way to school. The school administration had to increase security. Chloe saw how much it was affecting him. One day after school, she suggested something. Let's do something different. Something to take your mind off all this. Like what? Let's go to the park. Eat popcorn. Ride the paddle boats. Normal things that normal people do. Gabriel hesitated, but she was right. He needed normalcy. He needed to remember what it was like to be just a 12-year-old kid. He agreed. They went to Central Park. They bought popcorn from a street vendor. They walked along the stone paths, watching the ducks in the pond, observing families having picnics. For a few hours, Gabriel felt light. He forgot about the billions. He forgot about the responsibility. He forgot about everything except the present moment. Chloe told him stories about her family, about her father who woke up at 4 in the morning to drive his bus route, about her mother who cooked delicious meals even when she was tired, about her younger brother who dreamed of being a soccer player. And Gabriel listened with genuine attention because those stories reminded him of who he used to be. "You know what I admire about you?" Chloe asked as they walked around the lake. "What?" "You've never forgotten where you came from. Even with all that money, you're still humble. You still care about people. I learned that from someone very special." "Mr. Vance?" Gabriel nodded. "He always said that money is just paper. What matters is what you do with it." "And what do you want to do?" Gabriel stopped walking and looked at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I want to help people like me. People who weren't lucky. People who need a chance." "You already do. You pay for the scholarships of 20 students. I want to do more, a lot more." Chloe smiled. "Then, do it. You have the power to." They stood there watching the sun slowly disappear, and for a moment everything seemed possible. Everything seemed right. Everything seemed to make sense. But the peace was short-lived. The next day, Victoria was summoned to testify before the FBI. The news leaked minutes later. Television cameras surrounded the building. Journalists shouted questions. Victoria arrived hidden in a car with tinted windows, accompanied by 3 lawyers. The deposition lasted 6 hours. She denied everything. She said she had never participated in any schemes, that she knew nothing, that she was the victim of a setup. But the evidence was solid. Documents, recordings, testimonies. Everything pointed to her direct involvement. When she left the building, she tried to avoid the journalists, but one of them managed to get close and ask the question on everyone's mind. "Do you regret humiliating Gabriel Miller?" Victoria stopped. She looked at the camera, and for the first time, she seemed truly broken. "I regret a lot of things, but what I regret most is not learning to respect people for who they are, not for what they have." It was the first time she had shown public remorse, and that sentence spread as quickly as the original video. But for many, it was too little, too late. The damage was done. Edward watched his daughter's statement on television. He saw the strong, arrogant woman she had always been transform into someone fragile, scared, lost. And he felt a profound sadness, because he knew that part of the blame was his. He had created that monster. He had taught her the importance of power, but had forgotten to teach her the importance of compassion. That night, he wrote a letter to Victoria. It wasn't a letter of accusation, it was their father's letter. It said that he loved her, that he was disappointed but he hadn't given up on her, that he believed in the possibility of redemption, that she still had time to change, to be better, to rebuild not just her career, but her character. Victoria read the letter alone in her empty apartment, and for the first time in weeks, she cried. Not out of anger, not out of frustration, but out of genuine regret, because she realized she had lost more than a company. She had lost herself along the way. Meanwhile, Gabriel was making decisions. That would shape his future. In a meeting with his team of consultants, he announced the creation of a foundation, the Arthur Vance Foundation. It would be dedicated to helping children in vulnerable situations. It would offer scholarships, vocational training, psychological support, temporary housing. Everything Gabriel wished he'd had when he lived on the streets. The initial investment would be $500 million, part of the fortune he had inherited. Money that would now have a purpose, a meaning, a real impact. When Eleanor learned of the decision, she hugged Gabriel tightly. "Arthur would be so proud of you. I hope I'm doing the right thing." "You are, because you're using what you have to help those in need. That's more than many billionaires do in a lifetime. Gabriel smiled. But it was a tired smile, because he knew the journey was just beginning, that he would have to face more challenges, more prejudice, more people who would judge him by his age, his appearance, his origins. But he also knew he wasn't alone. He had Eleanor. He had Chloe. He had the memory of Arthur guiding his every step, and he had something that no money could buy. He had a purpose. 3 months had passed since that fateful meeting. Autumn had arrived in New York, bringing shorter days and orange-hued afternoons. The city continued its frantic routine, indifferent to the personal dramas unfolding in its skyscrapers and luxury apartments. Sterling Development had been sold. Edward managed to close a deal with a consortium of international investors who took over the debts and unfinished projects. The Sterling name was kept for contractual reasons, but the family no longer had any control. It was the end of an era. Edward officially retired. He bought a ranch in upstate New York and began dedicating his time to caring for horses and growing vegetables. He discovered there was peace in simplicity, something he had never known while commanding an empire. Sometimes he called Victoria. They didn't talk much. He would ask how she was. She would say she was fine. But he could hear the lie in her voice. Victoria was facing a criminal trial. The charges were serious: racketeering, bid rigging, money laundering. Her lawyers worked day and night trying to negotiate a plea bargain, but the U.S. Attorney's Office was unyielding. They wanted to make an example of her. She spent her days in the apartment, which now felt like a gilded cage. Her friends had disappeared. The invitations to events stopped coming. The phone that once never stopped ringing now remained silent for days on end. The loneliness weighed on her shoulders like lead. It was on one of these lonely afternoons that Victoria finally did something she had been putting off for months. She picked up her phone, found a number she had never dialed, and pressed the call button. On the other end, a voice answered. "Hello?" Victoria took a deep breath. "Gabriel? It's Victoria Sterling." There was a long silence. Gabriel was at home, sitting at the kitchen table doing his math homework. He recognized the voice immediately. Eleanor, who was making dinner, looked at him with raised eyebrows in a silent question. "Hi," Gabriel replied, his voice neutral. "I know I have no right to call. I know I caused a lot of pain. But I need to talk to you. In person, if possible." Gabriel thought about refusing. He thought about hanging up. He thought about all the valid reasons to never speak to that woman again. But something in the tone of her voice, something broken and genuine, made him hesitate. "Why?" "Because I need to apologize. For real. Not to make myself feel better, but because you deserve to hear it." Gabriel looked at Eleanor, who nodded encouragingly. "Okay, tomorrow, at 3 in the afternoon, in Central Park, near the lake." "Thank you. I'll be there." The next day, Gabriel arrived at the park with Eleanor, who had insisted on coming along. Chloe wanted to come too, as a gesture of support for her friend. The three of them sat on a bench near the lake, watching the ducks glide smoothly across the water. Victoria arrived on time. She looked different. No makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a plain white blouse. She seemed smaller, more fragile, more human. She approached slowly, as if afraid of being rejected. "Gabriel, thank you for agreeing to meet me." He nodded without standing up. Victoria looked at Eleanor and Chloe, greeted them with a nod, and turned her attention back to the boy. "I've spent the last few months thinking about what I did, what I said, how I acted, and I realized I was cruel. Not just in that meeting, but for years, with employees, with partners, with anyone I deemed inferior." Gabriel listened in silence. Victoria continued, her voice choked with emotion. "I grew up believing I was worth more than others because of my last name. My family's money, the schools I went to, I was never taught to see people as equals. And when you walked into that room, dressed the way you were, all I could see was what you didn't have, not who you were." Tears began to stream down her face. They weren't calculated tears, they were tears of genuine remorse. "I destroyed everything. The company, my relationship with my father, my reputation, my freedom. And you know what's worse? I deserve all of it. Because it wasn't just the financial crimes. The bigger crime was losing my humanity along the way. Gabriel finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know that I understand, that I've learned, that I will never be that person again. Even if it's too late to change what happened, it's not too late to change who I am. Eleanor, who had been watching everything, in silence, stood up and placed a hand on Victoria's shoulder. Acknowledging your mistakes is the first step. But the road is long. Victoria looked at her gratefully. I know, and I'm going to walk it. Even if no one is watching. Even if no one believes me. Gabriel stood up too. He took Victoria's hand and for the first time shook it. The gesture was simple, but loaded with meaning. It was forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. It was humanity. I accept your apology, but it doesn't change what happened. You still have to answer for your crimes. You'll face the consequences. I know, and I will. But I wanted you to know that no matter what happens to me, you taught me something. You taught me that power without respect is just tyranny. Gabriel let go of her hand. I hope you find your way. I really do. Victoria nodded, wiped her tears, and walked away. Before leaving, she turned one last time. Thank you for meeting me, for listening to me, for being a bigger person than I was. After she left, Gabriel sat back down on the bench. Chloe touched his arm. You did the right thing. I know, but it's not easy. It never is, but that's why it's worth it. The following months brought changes for everyone. Victoria was sentenced to 5 years in a minimum security facility with eligibility for a work release program and weekend furloughs. It wasn't a light sentence, but it wasn't the maximum she could have received either. The judge considered her genuine remorse and her cooperation with the investigation as mitigating factors. While serving her sentence, Victoria began teaching business administration to vulnerable women at a non-profit. She discovered that teaching entrepreneurship was more fulfilling than building skyscrapers. She discovered that helping was more powerful than dominating. Edward visited his daughter every week. He brought fruit from his ranch, books he thought she would like, stories about the horses, and slowly they rebuilt their relationship. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't like before, but it was real. It was honest. It was based on mutual respect. Gabriel, for his part, saw the Arthur Vance Foundation grow beyond his expectations. In 6 months, they had already helped 300 children. They offered temporary housing, education, psychological support, and vocational training. Many of those children came from the streets, just as Gabriel once had. He visited the foundation every week. He talked to the children. He listened to their stories. He saw in their eyes the same fear, the same hope, the same resilience that he knew so well. And in every child he helped, he felt he was honoring Arthur's memory. Chloe became more than a friend. She became an advisor, a confidant, a partner in his dreams. She helped him choose projects for the foundation. She suggested improvements. She brought new ideas. And Gabriel realized that, slowly, he was developing feelings that went beyond friendship. It wasn't love yet. They were 12 and 15, but it was the beginning of something beautiful, something that could grow with time. Eleanor remained his safe harbor. The simple house in Queens was the refuge Gabriel returned to every night, where they talked about their day, where she cooked dinners that smelled like home, where he felt not like a billionaire but like a beloved grandson. A year after the meeting that changed everything, Gabriel was invited to give a speech at a university. The topic was business ethics. At first he hesitated. He didn't like public speaking. He didn't like being the center of attention, but Eleanor encouraged him. You have a story to tell, a story that can inspire other people. So Gabriel accepted. On the day of the speech, the auditorium was packed. Business students, professors, entrepreneurs, journalists, everyone wanted to hear the boy who had toppled an empire with a single gesture. Gabriel walked onto the stage wearing a new, well-fitting suit, but nothing ostentatious. His tie was straight. His leather briefcase, however, was the same one, worn, scratched, full of stories. He began to speak. He told them about his childhood on the streets, about the day he met Arthur, about how he learned that power isn't about controlling people, but about serving a greater purpose. He spoke about the meeting with Victoria, about the humiliation, about the decision to activate Clause 8.3, about the consequences, and about what he learned from it all. I could have just ignored the prejudice, I could have taken the money and moved on, but I realized that if I did that, I would be saying that it's okay, that it's acceptable to judge people by their appearance, that it's normal to disrespect those who come from nothing. The audience listened in absolute silence. Activating that clause wasn't revenge, it was protection. It was a boundary, it was saying, I deserve respect. Everyone deserves respect. And if you can't offer that, then you don't deserve my partnership. Some in the audience began to applaud. Others had tears in their eyes. But the most important thing I learned is that consequences aren't the end of the story. Victoria lost a lot. She committed crimes. She was convicted. But today, she is rebuilding her life. She is helping other people. She is learning what really matters. And that gives me hope that all of us can change. We can be better. Gabriel finished his speech with a quote from Arthur. He always said, "True power isn't about how much you have, but how you use it." And I would add, true character isn't about never making mistakes, but about having the courage to get back up after you fall. The ovation was long and emotional. Gabriel came down from the stage and was surrounded by students wanting to take pictures, ask questions, seek advice. He answered them all with patience, with kindness, with humility. Chloe was in the front row smiling proudly. Eleanor was there, too, discreetly wiping away tears. And Gabriel, looking at them, felt that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. That night, back at home, Gabriel went into his room and opened the drawer next to his bed. He took out Arthur's letter, the one he reread whenever he needed direction. But this time he didn't need to read it. He just held the paper between his fingers, feeling the weight of the words he knew by heart. Gabriel, you saved me when no one else cared. It wasn't out of obligation, it wasn't for personal gain, it was because you have a pure heart. I hope you never lose that. Money is just a tool. Use it to build, not to destroy. And always remember, true power isn't about how much you have, but how you use it. Gabriel carefully folded the letter and put it back. He lay down on his bed, looked at the ceiling and smiled. It wasn't a smile of victory. It was a smile of peace, of purpose fulfilled, of a path found. Outside, New York City kept pulsing. Millions of stories intertwined in the streets, in the buildings, in the parks. Stories of struggle, of overcoming, of failure, of redemption. And amidst them all, Gabriel's story stood out, not for the fortune he possessed, but for how he chose to use it. The case became nationally known as the Handshake collapse. It became a case study in universities, a topic of debate on business ethics, a symbol of how prejudice can destroy not just people, but entire empires. But for Gabriel, it was just a memory that he had been tested and had not bowed, that he had faced arrogance with dignity, that he had used his power not to destroy but to set necessary boundaries. Years later, when Gabriel was 20 and managing one of the largest social impact funds in the country, a reporter asked him if he regretted activating that clause. Gabriel thought for a moment before answering. I don't regret it, because I learned that silence in the face of disrespect is complicity, and I wasn't willing to be complicit, but I also learned that consequences should be accompanied by an opportunity for redemption. Victoria paid for her mistakes, but she also got a chance to start over, and today she does incredible work helping other women. That shows me that no one is beyond the possibility of change. And what about the handshake that didn't happen? Gabriel smiled. It was the most important handshake of my life, not because it happened, but because it didn't. It showed me who I don't want to be, and it gave me the chance to show who I really am. The interview ended, but the final line echoed. Sometimes prejudice doesn't have to shout. Sometimes it just doesn't shake your hand. And sometimes it's in that very moment that we reveal our true character. Gabriel continued his work. He continued helping homeless children. He continued investing in social projects. He continued to be deep down that boy who once held a stranger's hand because it was the right thing to do. And Victoria, having served her time, dedicated the rest of her life to teaching others not to make the same mistakes, to look beyond appearances, to value humanity above all else. Edward lived out his final years on his ranch, at peace with himself, proud of the daughter she had become after her fall. Eleanor continued to be the grandmother Gabriel never had, his safe harbor, his unconditional love. And Chloe? Chloe became Gabriel's partner not just in business but in life. Together, they built not just a foundation but a family based on respect, love, and purpose. The legacy of Arthur Vance lived on, not just in the money he left behind, but in the example he set, in the heart he shaped, in the life he transformed. And it all started with a refused handshake, with a filmed humiliation, with a courageous decision, with a 12-year-old boy who knew he deserved respect, even when the world told him otherwise. New York kept spinning, the stories kept being written, and the lesson remained clear. Power without respect is tyranny, wealth without compassion is emptiness, and dignity is the one treasure no one can take from you unless you let them. Gabriel had allowed the humiliation once, just once, and with that refusal to accept the unacceptable, he had changed not only his own life but the lives of thousands. Because sometimes all it takes to change the world is the courage to say, "I deserve respect, and if you can't offer me that, then our business here is done."